The blood from her split lip had frozen against her skin, and Juliana Foster no longer felt the cold, which she knew meant death was coming for her in the Kansas winter of 1881. She lay in the narrow alley between the Mercantile and the saloon in Wichita, where her husband had thrown her after his fists had done their worst, taking her coat and boots before leaving her to freeze in the February darkness. The wind howled through the wooden buildings, carrying snow that settled on her torn dress and tangled dark hair, and she thought of her mother's grave back in Missouri, wondering if she would see her soon. Her eyes drifted closed, the pain in her ribs fading to numbness when she heard the sound of boots crunching through snow. Heavy footsteps, deliberate and steady, coming closer. She tried to call out, but her voice emerged as nothing more than a whisper lost in the wind. The footsteps stopped, and through her half-closed eyes she saw a tall figure bend down, blocking the swirling snow. "Sweet Jesus," a deep voice said, rough with shock and anger. "What happened to you?" Strong arms slid beneath her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing, and Juliana felt herself pressed against a wool coat that smelled of leather and horses and wood smoke. She tried to speak, to warn him that her husband would come back and hurt anyone who helped her, but the words would not come. "Stay with me now," the voice said, urgent and warm against her ear. "I have got you. You are safe." She felt movement, heard a door open, felt warmth rushing over her frozen skin like a physical thing. Her body began to shake violently as feeling returned to her limbs, and the pain came roaring back with it. She cried out, unable to stop herself, and the arms around her tightened. "Doc." The man shouted, "Doc Brennan, I need you now." "What in blazes?" another voice began, then stopped. "Bring her into the back room, quickly." Juliana felt herself lowered onto something soft, a bed or a cot, and hands began examining her with professional efficiency. She forced her eyes open and saw a gray-haired man with spectacles peering down at her, his face grave. Beyond him stood the man who had carried her, and even through her pain and confusion, she noticed him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His jaw was set hard, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Zachary," the doctor said sharply. "Help me get these wet clothes off her before she catches pneumonia on top of everything else. Questions can wait." The young man, Zachary, moved immediately to help, his hands gentle despite their size as they worked to remove her frozen dress. Juliana felt tears slip down her cheeks, shame burning through her worse than any cold. She was nothing now, just broken and worthless, exactly as Thomas had told her every day of their 2-year marriage. "You are going to be all right," Zachary said softly, meeting her eyes as the doctor wrapped her in warm blankets. "I promise you that." She wanted to tell him not to make promises he could not keep, that there was no all right for someone like her, but darkness pulled at her again, and this time she let it take her. When Juliana woke, pale sunlight was streaming through a window and the pain had localized itself to specific places: her ribs, her face, her left arm. She lay very still, trying to understand where she was and what had happened. The room was small and clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. A chair sat beside the bed, and in it sat the man called Zachary, his head tipped back against the wall, asleep. She studied him in the daylight. He had a strong face, weathered by sun and wind, with a straight nose and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was drawn down now in sleep. His hands rested on his thighs, calloused and scarred from work. A working man, then, not a gambler or a businessman. His clothes were clean but well worn, a plain shirt and denim trousers, boots that had been resoled more than once. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. For a moment he looked disoriented, then his gaze focused on her, and he straightened immediately. "You are awake," he said, and relief flooded his face. "How do you feel?" "Like I was beaten and left in the cold," Juliana said, her voice hoarse and broken. She tried to smile to show it was a poor attempt at humor, but her split lip cracked and she winced. Zachary stood and poured water from a pitcher into a glass, then helped her sit up enough to drink. The water was cool and sweet, and she drank gratefully, though swallowing hurt. "The doc says you have 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and more bruises than he could count," Zachary said, his voice carefully controlled. "But nothing that will not heal, given time and care." "I have no money for a doctor," Juliana said immediately, panic rising in her chest. "I cannot pay for this room or for medicine. I have nothing." "You do not need to worry about that," Zachary said firmly. "It is taken care of. By you." She stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "I know you were dying in an alley," he said simply. "That is enough." Tears stung her eyes again, and she looked away, unable to bear the kindness in his face. Kindness was dangerous. Kindness made you hope, and hope was the cruelest thing of all. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then decided there was no point in lying. Thomas would find her soon enough anyway. "Juliana Foster." She watched his face, waiting for recognition, but there was none. He simply nodded. "I am Zachary Irons. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles outside town." "My husband," Juliana said, forcing the words out. "He will come looking for me. He will be angry that I am here. You should not have helped me." Zachary's expression hardened. "Your husband did this to you," she nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Then your husband can go straight to hell," Zachary said flatly. "And if he comes looking for you, he will have to go through me first." "You do not understand," Juliana said desperately. "Thomas is not a man you want to cross. He is mean and he is cruel and he has friends who are worse than he is. They will hurt you for this." "Let them try," Zachary said, and there was steel in his voice that made her believe he meant it. "You are under my protection now, Juliana Foster. Nobody is going to hurt you again." The door opened and Doc Brennan entered, carrying a tray with bread and soup. He looked pleased to see her awake. "Good, you are conscious," he said briskly. "You need to eat to rebuild your strength. The arm will need to stay splinted for 6 weeks and the ribs will hurt for a good month, but you will mend." "Doc," Juliana said quietly, "Thomas Foster is my husband. He will come here." The doctor's expression grew stern. "Thomas Foster is a drunk and a bully, and if he sets foot in my office, I will tell him exactly what I think of a man who beats his wife. You are my patient now, and you have a right to medical care without interference." "He has a right to take her home," Zachary said, his jaw tight. "By law, a wife belongs to her husband." "Not in my office she does not," Doc Brennan said sharply. "And I will thank you to remember that this is 1881, not the Dark Ages. A man has no right to beat a woman half to death, husband or not." Juliana listened to them argue over her fate and felt despair settle over her like a shroud. She knew how this would end. Thomas would come, and he would take her back, and eventually he would kill her. That was simply the way of things. Women like her, who had no family and no money and nowhere to go, had no choices at all. But for now, she was warm and safe, and someone had cared enough to save her life. That was more than she had expected to have ever again. So she ate the soup that Doc Brennan had brought and let herself pretend, just for a little while, that spring might actually come. 3 days passed in the doctor's back room. Juliana slept most of the time, her body demanding rest to heal itself. Zachary came every day, sitting in the chair beside her bed, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. He told her about his ranch, about the horses he raised and trained, about the wide Kansas sky, and the way the prairie grass moved in the wind like ocean waves. He told her about growing up in Texas, about coming north after the war, his father's war, he said, since he had been too young to fight, and deciding to make a life for himself where the land was still open and wild. Juliana listened and said little, still not trusting this kindness, still waiting for it to be snatched away. But Zachary never pressed her for her own story, never demanded anything from her. He simply sat with her, a steady presence, and slowly she began to feel something she had not felt in years. Safe. On the fourth day, Thomas came. Juliana heard his voice in the front room of the doctor's office, loud and belligerent, demanding to see his wife. Her whole body went rigid with terror, and she looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. Knowing there was nowhere, the door opened and Zachary stepped through, his face calm but his eyes hard. "Stay quiet," he said softly. "He is not coming back here." "You cannot stop him," Juliana whispered, her voice shaking. "He has the law on his side." "We will see about that," Zachary said, and went back out, closing the door firmly behind him. Juliana could hear the argument through the door, Thomas's voice rising in anger, Doc Brennan's sharp and unyielding, and underneath it all, Zachary's low rumble, steady and implacable. Then there was a crash, the sound of something breaking, and Juliana flinched. The door burst open and Thomas stood there, his face red with rage, his eyes finding her immediately. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a heavy jaw and small, mean eyes. He had been handsome once, or Juliana had thought so when she was 18 and foolish enough to believe his pretty words. Now she could only see the cruelty in every line of his face. "There you are," he snarled, taking a step into the room. "Get up. You are coming home." "She is not going anywhere," Zachary said, appearing behind him. His voice was quiet, but there was a promise of violence in it that made Thomas pause. "This is none of your business, Cowboy," Thomas said, turning to face him. "That is my wife, and I will do what I please with her." "You beat her and left her to freeze to death," Zachary said, his words precise and cold. "That makes it my business." "I was teaching her a lesson," Thomas said dismissively. "She has a sharp tongue and needs to learn her place. It is a husband's right." "It is a coward's crime," Zachary said. "And you will not touch her again." Thomas laughed, an ugly sound. "And who is going to stop me? You." He looked Zachary up and down, assessing. "I know who you are. Zachary Irons, the horse breeder. You think you are tough because you can break a wild Mustang. I will break you just as easy." "You can try," Zachary said evenly, "but it will not go the way you think." For a moment, the two men faced each other, and Juliana held her breath, certain she was about to see bloodshed. Then Sheriff Morrison appeared in the doorway, a grizzled man in his 50s with hard eyes and a star on his vest. "That is enough," he said sharply. "Thomas, get out of here before I lock you up for disturbing the peace." "She is my wife," Thomas protested, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. "I have a right. You have a right to leave my town before I find a reason to arrest you," the sheriff said flatly. "Doc Brennan says you beat this woman nearly to death. I cannot arrest you for that. More is the pity. But I can make your life mighty difficult if you stay around here. So I suggest you go sleep off whatever whiskey is making you stupid and think real hard about whether you want to push this." Thomas looked between the sheriff and Zachary, his face darkening with fury. Then his eyes found Juliana again, and the look in them made her blood run cold. "This is not over," he said softly. "You hear me, Jules? You are mine, and you will always be mine. You can hide behind these men for now, but eventually you will have to face me. And when you do, you will wish you had frozen to death in that alley." He turned and left, shoving past the sheriff with deliberate force. They heard his boots stomping through the front room, then the slam of the door. Juliana was shaking so hard the bed trembled beneath her. Zachary crossed to her immediately, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her hand carefully, mindful of her injuries. "He cannot touch you," he said firmly. "I will not let him." "You heard him," Juliana said, tears streaming down her face. "He will come back. He will hurt you or the doctor or anyone who tries to help me. That is what he does. That is who he is." "Then we will deal with him when he comes," Zachary said. "But in the meantime, you need to heal and you need to be safe. And I know a place where you can be both." "Where?" Juliana asked desperately. "My ranch," Zachary said. "It is outside of town, away from prying eyes. I have hands who work for me, good men who will not stand for a woman being hurt. You can stay there until you are healed, until you decide what you want to do next." "I cannot impose on you like that," Juliana protested weakly. "You have already done so much." "You are not imposing," Zachary said. "I am offering. There is a difference." He looked at her intently, his gray eyes steady and sure. "I know you do not know me, and I know you have no reason to trust any man right now. But I give you my word, Juliana, that you will be safe on my land. I will not let anything happen to you." Juliana looked at him, this stranger who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, and made a decision that terrified her. "All right," she whispered. "I will go with you." The relief on his face was so genuine it made her heart ache. "Good," he said softly. "We will leave tomorrow, as soon as the doc says you are well enough to travel." Doc Brennan, who had been standing in the doorway, nodded his approval. "I will give you laudanum for the pain and instructions for care of the ribs and arm. But yes, I think getting her out of town is wise. Thomas Foster is not a man to give up easily." That night, Juliana lay awake listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. Somewhere in Wichita, Thomas was planning his revenge. She knew him well enough to be certain of that. He would not let her go, would not let her escape his control. But for the first time in 2 years, she had someone standing between her and his fists, someone who had looked at her broken body and said, "You are worth saving." It was enough to make her believe, just barely, that perhaps there was a future beyond mere survival. The journey to Zachary's ranch took longer than it should have, because they had to stop frequently for Juliana's sake. Zachary had borrowed a wagon from the livery, padding the back with blankets so she could lie down, but every bump in the frozen road sent pain shooting through her ribs. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, not wanting to be more trouble than she already was, but Zachary noticed anyway. "We can rest," he said, pulling the horses to a stop. "There is no rush." "I am fine," Juliana said through gritted teeth. "You are not fine, and there is no shame in that," Zachary said gently. He climbed into the back of the wagon and helped her sit up, then handed her a flask. "Whiskey." "Just a sip. It will help with the pain." She took a small swallow and felt the burn of it slide down her throat, warming her from the inside. The pain did not disappear, but it became more bearable, more distant. "Thank you," she said, handing it back. Zachary nodded and looked out over the landscape. They were far from town now, surrounded by rolling prairie that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The snow had stopped the day before, and now everything was white and clean and silent, the world holding its breath. "It is beautiful here," Juliana said quietly. "So much sky." "That is what I thought when I first saw it," Zachary agreed. "In Texas, we had hills and trees, but here you can see forever. It makes you feel small and large at the same time, if that makes any sense." "It does," Juliana said, and realized she meant it. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Zachary said carefully, "You do not have to talk about it if you do not want to. But if you ever need to tell someone what happened, what he did to you, I will listen." and I will not judge." Juliana looked down at her splinted arm, at the bruises that mottled her skin in shades of purple and yellow and green. "There is not much to tell," she said softly. "I met Thomas 3 years ago in Missouri. He was charming and handsome, and he said all the things a girl wants to hear. My mother had just died, and I had no other family, and I was so lonely. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and Zachary waited patiently. "He was different after the wedding," she continued. "Little things at first. He did not like the way I cooked or cleaned. He said I was lazy, useless. Then he started drinking more, and when he drank, he got mean. The first time he hit me, he cried and apologized and swore it would never happen again. I believed him." Her voice was flat now, reciting facts without emotion. "But it did happen again, and again, and each time was worse than the last. He said it was my fault, that I made him angry, that if I would just learn to obey him, he would not have to discipline me. We moved to Wichita 6 months ago because he said we needed a fresh start, but nothing changed. It just got worse." "What happened the night I found you?" Zachary asked quietly. "I burned the roast," Juliana said, and laughed bitterly. "That was my great crime. I burned the roast because I was trying to mend his shirt at the same time, and I forgot to check the oven. He started hitting me, and I tried to get away, and that made him angrier. He dragged me outside, and he kept hitting me, and then he took my coat and my boots and said I could sleep in the alley like the dog I was. He said maybe the cold would teach me some respect." Zachary's hands had curled into fists again, his knuckles white. "He left you there to die," he said, his voice rough. "Yes," Juliana said simply. "And I thought that might be a mercy, at least it would be over." "Juliana," Zachary said, and there was such pain in his voice that she looked up at him in surprise. "You cannot mean that. You cannot want to die." "I did not want to die," she said slowly. "I just did not want to live like that anymore. There is a difference." Zachary reached out and took her hand, holding it carefully between both of his. "You will not have to," he said fiercely. "I know it does not feel like it now, but you are free of him. You are going to heal, and you are going to be strong again, and you are going to have a life that is yours. I promise you that." "You keep making me promises," Juliana said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why? Why do you care what happens to me?" Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Because I know what it is like to feel helpless," he said finally. "My father was a hard man, quick with his fists when he was drinking. He never hit my mother, but he hit me and my brother plenty. I swore when I left home that I would never be like him, that I would never stand by and watch someone abuse their power over another person. When I saw you in that alley, I saw myself at 15 years old, and I knew I had to help. Not for any noble reason, just because I could not live with myself if I walked away." "I am glad you did not walk away," Juliana whispered. "So am I," Zachary said, meeting her eyes. "So am I." They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered prairie in shades of orange and gold. The house was larger than Juliana had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Behind it were a barn and several outbuildings, corrals where horses moved restlessly in the fading light. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall and lean with a weathered face and gray hair. He raised a hand in greeting, then his expression changed as he saw Juliana in the back of the wagon. "Zach," he called, his voice concerned. "What happened?" "This is Juliana Foster," Zachary said, jumping down from the wagon. "She needs a safe place to stay for a while." "Juliana, this is Henry Grant, my foreman. He has been with me since I bought this place 4 years ago." Henry came closer, his eyes taking in Juliana's injuries with a practiced glance. "Madam," he said respectfully, "you are welcome here. Let me help you inside." Between the two of them, they got Juliana out of the wagon and into the house. The interior was warm and comfortable, clearly the home of a bachelor, but clean and well kept. There was a large fireplace with a fire already crackling, throwing heat and light into the room. Furniture was minimal but solid: a table with chairs, a worn sofa, shelves lined with books. "Upstairs," Zachary said. "The guest room is made up." They helped her up the stairs, every step an agony, and into a small bedroom with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Juliana sank onto the bed with a sigh of relief, exhausted beyond measure. "I will bring up some dinner in a bit," Zachary said. "For now, just rest. You are safe here, Juliana, I promise." There was that word again. Promise. A word that had meant nothing in her marriage, that Thomas had broken over and over until it was just empty sound. But when Zachary said it, she wanted to believe him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Juliana lay back against the pillows and looked around the room. It was simple and clean and peaceful, and for the first time in years she felt like she could breathe. Outside her window, the prairie stretched endlessly under the darkening sky, and somewhere in that vastness was spring, waiting to be born. The first weeks at the ranch passed in a haze of pain and slow healing. Juliana spent most of her time in the guest room, sleeping or staring out the window at the frozen landscape. Zachary brought her meals 3 times a day, sitting with her while she ate, making quiet conversation that demanded nothing from her. He told her about the horses, about the men who worked for him, about his plans to expand the ranch in the coming years. Slowly, carefully, Juliana began to tell him about her own life. About growing up in Missouri, about her mother who had been a seamstress and taught Juliana the trade. About the small house they had shared, always clean even if it was poor. About her mother's death from consumption, and how lost Juliana had felt in the months that followed. "I thought Thomas was saving me," she said one evening as they sat by the fire downstairs. Her ribs had healed enough that she could move around more easily now, and she had grown tired of being confined to the bedroom. "I thought marriage would give me security, a family, a purpose. I did not understand that I was trading one kind of loneliness for something much worse." "You could not have known," Zachary said gently. "Men like Thomas are good at hiding what they are until it is too late." "My mother would have known," Juliana said. "She always said she could see the truth of a person in their eyes. I wish I had inherited that gift." "You survived him," Zachary said. "That takes its own kind of strength." Juliana looked at him across the firelight, this man who had become her protector and friend, and felt something stir in her chest that she had thought was dead. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition that her heart might someday be capable of trusting again. "Tell me about your horses," she said, changing the subject before her thoughts could go any further down that dangerous path. Zachary's face lit up the way it always did when he talked about his work. "I breed them for endurance and intelligence," he said. "Not the fastest horses, maybe, but the smartest and the strongest. The kind of horse that will carry you through a blizzard or across a desert and bring you home safe." "Like you," Juliana said without thinking, then flushed. "I mean, you brought me home safe." Zachary looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "This is your home too for as long as you want it to be," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. There is no rush for you to leave, no expectation that you will go anywhere. You can stay here and heal, and when you are ready, we will figure out what comes next." "I cannot stay here forever," Juliana said, though part of her desperately wanted to. "It would not be proper. People would talk." "Let them talk," Zachary said dismissively. Out here, we make our own rules. Henry and the other hands know you are here as my guest, under my protection. That is all anyone needs to know. What about Thomas? Juliana asked, voicing the fear that woke her in the night. He will not just let me go. He will come looking for me. I know, Zachary said seriously. And we will be ready for him if he does. But this ranch is 5 miles from town, and in winter, that might as well be 50. He has no way of knowing where you are unless someone tells him, and no one here will do that. Juliana wanted to believe him, but she knew Thomas in a way Zachary did not. She knew his cruelty and his persistence, his need to control and dominate. He would not forget her, would not let her go. It was only a matter of time. But for now, she was safe and warm, and that was more than she had dared hope for. So she pushed her fears aside and let herself simply be, in this moment, in this place, with this man who had saved her life. As winter deepened into February, Juliana grew stronger. Her ribs stopped aching with every breath. Her arm began to heal inside its splint. The bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing. She began to help around the house, insisting that she could not sit idle while Zachary and Henry did everything. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and organized the cluttered kitchen, finding a purpose in the simple domestic tasks that had once been a source of terror. The difference, she realized, was that here, no one criticized her work or found fault with everything she did. When she made stew for dinner, Zachary praised it. When she swept the floors, Henry thanked her. They treated her efforts with respect and gratitude, and slowly she began to remember that she was competent and capable, that Thomas's constant criticism had been a lie designed to break her spirit. One morning in late February, she woke to find the world transformed. The sun was shining for the first time in weeks, bright and warm enough to begin melting the snow. She stood at her bedroom window and watched water drip from the eaves, listened to the distant sound of the ice breaking up in the creek, and felt something loosen in her chest. Spring was coming. The world was waking up, and maybe she could too. She went downstairs and found Zachary at the table, drinking coffee and reading a week-old newspaper someone had brought from town. He looked up as she entered and smiled, that slow, warm smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Juliana admitted, pouring herself coffee. "The sun woke me. It is a beautiful day." "It is," Zachary agreed. "I thought I might take you out to see the horses today if you are feeling up to it. You have been cooped up in this house for weeks. You should get some fresh air." "I would like that," Juliana said, surprised by how much she meant it. After breakfast, they bundled up in coats and boots. Zachary had bought her proper winter clothes to replace what Thomas had taken and walked out to the corrals. The horses gathered at the fence as they approached, curious and hopeful for treats. Zachary produced apples from his pockets and handed half to Juliana. "Hold your hand flat," he instructed. "Let them come to you." Juliana offered an apple to a beautiful bay mare with a white star on her forehead, and the horse lipped it delicately from her palm. The touch of the soft muzzle against her skin, the warm breath in the cold air, made her laugh with delight. "She likes you," Zachary said, grinning. "That is Daisy. She is one of my best mares, smart as a whip and gentle as a kitten." "She is lovely," Juliana said, reaching up to stroke the mare's neck. "They all are." "This is what I love about horses," Zachary said, leaning against the fence. "They are honest. If they like you, they show it. If they do not, they show that too. There is no pretense, no hidden cruelty, just truth." "I wish people were more like that," Juliana said softly. "Some people are," Zachary said, looking at her steadily. "You just have to find them." They spent the morning with the horses, and Juliana felt something in her spirit lift and expand. Out here in the sunlight, surrounded by these beautiful creatures, with Zachary beside her talking about bloodlines and training techniques. She felt almost normal, almost like the girl she had been before Thomas, before the fear and the pain and the slow erosion of herself. As they walked back to the house for lunch, Zachary said carefully, "You seem better. Happier." "I am," Juliana said, surprised to realize it was true. "I know it has only been a few weeks, but I feel different, like I am waking up from a long nightmare." "Good," Zachary said simply. "You deserve to be happy, Juliana." She looked at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time, and felt her carefully guarded heart crack open just a little more. She was not ready to examine what she felt for him, not ready to put a name to the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled, or the way her pulse quickened when he was near. It was too soon, too dangerous, too terrifying to think about trusting a man with her heart again. But it was there, growing quietly inside her like the spring that was coming to the Kansas prairie. And for the first time, she did not try to crush it down. March arrived with a wildness of weather, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, the seasons battling for dominance. Juliana's arm healed enough for Doc Brennan to remove the splint when he visited the ranch to check on her progress. She flexed her fingers experimentally, marveling at the freedom of movement, even if the arm was still weak and sore. "You are healing well," the doctor said approvingly. "Another month and you will be good as new, at least physically." "And the rest?" Juliana asked quietly. Doc Brennan looked at her kindly. "The rest takes longer," he said. "What you have been through, that leaves scars that do not show. But you are strong, Juliana Foster, stronger than you know. And you have good people around you." He glanced toward the door where Zachary was waiting. "That cowboy would walk through fire for you. I hope you know that." "I do," Juliana said softly. "I just do not know what to do about it." "You do not have to do anything," the doctor said. "Just heal. The rest will sort itself out in time." After he left, Juliana found Zachary in the barn, working with a young stallion. She stood in the doorway and watched him, admiring the patience in his movements, the gentle firmness with which he handled the nervous horse. He spoke in a low, continuous murmur, soothing and calm, and gradually the stallion relaxed, accepting Zachary's touch. "You are good at that," Juliana said when he finally led the horse back to its stall. Zachary shrugged, brushing hay from his shirt. "It is just a matter of being patient and consistent. Horses respond to kindness and respect, same as people." "I think most people would benefit from being treated like your horses," Juliana said wryly, "with patience and kindness and respect." "You are not wrong," Zachary agreed. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Doc says you are healing well." "He does," Juliana confirmed. "I will be able to help more around here now. I have felt useless with this arm in a splint." "You have never been useless," Zachary said firmly. "You have been recovering from serious injuries. There is a difference." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Zachary said carefully, "I need to go into town tomorrow. We need supplies and I have business at the bank." "I would like you to come with me." Juliana's stomach clenched with instant fear. "To Wichita?" "Yes," Zachary said. "I know you are nervous about running into Thomas, but you cannot hide out here forever, and I think it would be good for you to see that you can go into town and be safe." "I will be with you the whole time." "What if he sees us?" Juliana asked, her voice tight. "What if he makes a scene?" "Then we deal with it," Zachary said. "But Juliana, you have to start living your life again. You cannot let fear of him control you forever. That is just another kind of cage." She knew he was right, even as everything in her screamed to refuse to stay hidden where it was safe. But Zachary was watching her with those steady gray eyes, and she found herself nodding despite her terror. "All right," she said. "I will go with you." The smile he gave her was worth the fear. "Thank you," he said softly. "I know that was not easy, but I promise I will keep you safe." "I know you will," Juliana said, and meant it. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the last gasp of winter before spring truly arrived. Juliana dressed carefully in the clothes Zachary had bought her. A simple blue dress with a warm coat, sturdy boots, a bonnet to protect her face from the wind. She looked at herself in the small mirror in her room and barely recognized the woman who stared back. Her face had filled out slightly from regular meals and rest, and the haunted look had faded from her eyes. She looked healthy, almost pretty, and it startled her. The trip to town took 2 hours in the wagon. Zachary kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her stories about the ranch hands and their various misadventures, clearly trying to distract her from her nervousness. It worked, mostly, and by the time they reached Wichita, she was more curious than terrified. The town was bustling with activity, people emerging from their winter hibernation to enjoy the warmer weather. Zachary helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm, which she took gratefully. They walked down the main street together, stopping at the dry goods store for supplies, then at the bank where Zachary conducted his business. People stared at them. Juliana was painfully aware of the whispers, the sidelong glances, the way conversations stopped as they passed. She knew what they were thinking. There is Thomas Foster's wife, walking around town with another man. The scandal of it made her cheeks burn, but she held her head high and kept her hand on Zachary's arm. They were leaving the bank when Thomas stepped out of the saloon across the street. He saw them immediately, and his face went dark with rage. He started across the street toward them, his gait unsteady with drink even at 10 in the morning. Juliana's whole body went rigid with terror, and she felt Zachary tense beside her. "Stay calm," he murmured. "I've got you." Thomas stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly, his eyes fixed on Juliana with a fury that made her want to run. "There you are," he said, his words slurred. "My dear wife, I have been looking for you." "She is not your wife anymore," Zachary said flatly. "She left you, and she is not coming back." "That is not how marriage works, Cowboy," Thomas snarled. "She is mine until death do us part. That is what she promised before God." "You broke those vows when you beat her half to death," Zachary said, his voice hard. "You have no claim on her anymore." "I have every claim," Thomas said, taking a step closer. "She belongs to me, the law says so, and I will have her back one way or another." "Touch her and I will break your arm," Zachary said conversationally. "That is a promise." Thomas laughed, an ugly sound. "You think you can take me, horse breeder? I will gut you like a pig." "You are welcome to try," Zachary said. "But I would rather not brawl in the street like common trash. You want to settle this properly, we can meet somewhere private and finish it, but Juliana is not going anywhere with you." "We will see about that," Thomas said, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. For all his bluster, he was facing a sober man who was several inches taller and clearly unafraid, and even drunk. Thomas could do that math. Sheriff Morrison appeared then, materializing as if from nowhere. "Thomas," he said wearily, "I thought I told you to leave this alone." "She is my wife," Thomas said, but he sounded petulant now instead of angry. "I have a right. You have the right to get out of my sight before I find a reason to lock you up," the sheriff interrupted. "Go sleep it off and stay away from these two. I am tired of your nonsense." Thomas glared at them all, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then his gaze found Juliana again, and the malice in it made her blood run cold. "This is not over, Jules," he said softly. "You cannot run from me forever. I will find you, and when I do, you will pay for this humiliation." "Get lost, Thomas," the sheriff said, his hand dropping to his gun belt meaningfully. Thomas turned and stalked away, disappearing into the saloon. Juliana realized she had been holding her breath and let it out in a shaky exhale. Her hands were trembling, and Zachary covered them with his own, warm and steady. "You did well," he said quietly. "You faced him and you did not back down. That took courage." "I was terrified," Juliana admitted. "Being brave means being terrified and doing it anyway," Zachary said. "And you were very brave." The sheriff tipped his hat to them. "I will keep an eye on him," he promised. "But watch your back, both of you. Thomas Foster is a mean drunk and he holds a grudge. I would not put it past him to try something stupid." "We will be careful," Zachary assured him. They finished their errands quickly after that and headed out of town. Juliana was quiet on the ride back, processing what had happened. She had faced Thomas and survived it, had not crumbled or begged or given in. That meant something, even if she was not quite sure what. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked as they neared the ranch. "I think so," Juliana said slowly. "I was so afraid, but it was not as bad as I thought it would be. He is just a man, a cruel man, a dangerous man, but just a man, not the monster I had built him up to be in my head." "That is good," Zachary said. "Fear loses its power when you face it." "I could not have done it without you," Juliana said, looking at him. "You were my courage today." "No," Zachary said gently. "The courage was all yours. I was just standing beside you while you found it." That night, Juliana lay in bed and thought about what it meant to be brave. For 2 years, she had equated bravery with endurance, with surviving one more day under Thomas's fists. But today she had learned that real bravery was standing up and saying, "No, I will not let you hurt me anymore." Real bravery was choosing to live instead of merely survive. And maybe, just maybe, real bravery was letting herself believe that she deserved better. That she deserved kindness and respect, and even, someday, love. Spring came to the Kansas prairie in a rush of green and gold. The snow melted away, revealing the earth beneath, and within days wildflowers were pushing up through the soil. The horses grew frisky with the warmer weather, and the ranch came alive with activity as Zachary and his hands prepared for the busy season ahead. Juliana threw herself into the work of the household, finding joy in tasks that had once been sources of dread. She planted a garden behind the house, coaxing seeds into life, watching them sprout and grow with a satisfaction that surprised her. She sewed new curtains for the windows, baked bread and pies, turned the house into a home. And she watched Zachary, trying not to be obvious about it but failing miserably. She watched the way he moved, graceful despite his size, the way he laughed with his men, the way he gentled the horses with patient hands. She watched the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, with a warmth in his gray eyes that made her heart race. She was falling in love with him. The realization came to her one evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of rose and amber. He was telling her a story about a horse he had trained as a young man, gesturing with his hands, his face animated, and she thought, "I love this man," with a clarity that took her breath away. It terrified her. The idea of giving her heart to another man, of making herself vulnerable again, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and preparing to jump. What if she was wrong about him? What if he turned out to be like Thomas, hiding cruelty beneath a kind exterior? What if she was just trading one cage for another? But even as the fears rose up, she knew they were not true. Zachary had had months to hurt her, to take advantage of her dependence on him, and he had done nothing but protect and care for her. He had never raised his voice to her, never demanded anything from her, never made her feel less than. He treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence, and she knew in her bones that he would never willingly cause her pain. "You are quiet tonight," Zachary said, pulling her from her thoughts. "Everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," Juliana said, and meant it. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what it was a few months ago. I feel like a different person." "You are the same person," Zachary said, "just not beaten down anymore. The real you is emerging, and she is pretty remarkable." "You do not know that," Juliana protested, flushing. "You barely know me." "I know you," Zachary said seriously. "I know you are brave and kind and strong. I know you can face down your worst nightmare and come through it with your head held high. I know you can take a broken life and start building something new from the pieces. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." "Zachary," Juliana said, her voice shaking. "I need to tell you something." "All right," he said, turning to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "I think," she began, then stopped, gathering her courage. "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Zachary went very still, his eyes searching her face, and for a horrible moment she thought she had made a terrible mistake, that she had misread everything, that he was going to tell her gently that he cared for her as a friend but nothing more. Then he smiled, slow and warm and radiant, and reached out to take her hand. "Thank God," he said softly, "because I have been in love with you since the moment I picked you up out of that alley and you looked at me like I was your last hope in the world." "You barely knew me then," Juliana said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I knew enough," Zachary said. "I knew you needed saving, and I knew I wanted to be the one to do it. And then I got to know you, and I fell even harder. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, Juliana Foster. And I love you." "I love you too," Juliana whispered, and then he was kissing her, gentle and careful, giving her all the time in the world to pull away if she wanted to. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted to lean into this, into him, into the promise of a future that did not include fear and pain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I will not rush you," he said. "I know you need time to heal, to trust again. We can take this as slow as you need." "I know," Juliana said, "and I appreciate that. But Zachary, I also do not want to waste any more of my life being afraid. I have spent 2 years living in fear, and I am done with it. I want to live. I want to love you and be loved by you and build a life together, if you will have me." "If I will have you," Zachary repeated incredulously. "Juliana, there is nothing I want more than that, but you are still married. We cannot be together properly until you are free of Thomas." "I know," Juliana said, the reality of her situation crashing back down on her. "I do not know how to get free of him. Divorce is almost impossible, and even if I could manage it, he would never agree to it. He would rather see me dead than let me go." "Then we will find another way," Zachary said firmly. "I will talk to a lawyer in Wichita, see what options we have. There has to be something we can do. In the meantime, you stay here with me and we figure this out together. All right?" "All right," Juliana agreed, hope blooming in her chest despite the obstacles ahead. Together. They sat on the porch until the stars came out, holding hands and making quiet plans for a future that seemed suddenly, wonderfully possible. And when Juliana finally went up to her room, she felt lighter than she had in years, as though she had shed a skin that no longer fit and emerged new and clean into the spring air. But happiness, as Juliana had learned, was always fragile. And Thomas Foster was not a man who let go of his possessions easily. 2 weeks after Juliana's confession of love, disaster arrived at the ranch. It was early evening, and Juliana was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard raised voices from outside. She went to the window and saw Thomas standing in the yard, surrounded by 3 other men she recognized from the saloon in town. They were all armed, and they were all clearly drunk. Zachary stood on the porch, his body language tense but controlled. Henry and two of the ranch hands flanked him, their expressions wary. "I've come for my wife," Thomas was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "I know she is here, Irons. Hand her over and there will be no trouble." "She is not your wife anymore," Zachary said, his voice hard. "She has left you. Go home, Thomas, before this gets ugly." "It is already ugly," Thomas said, pulling a gun from his belt. "Now get her out here or I start shooting." Juliana's blood went cold. She knew Thomas meant it. When he was drunk and angry, he was capable of anything. She could not let Zachary and his men get hurt because of her. Before she could think better of it, she opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. "I am here, Thomas," she said, proud that her voice did not shake. "Let these men alone. This is between you and me." "Juliana, no," Zachary said sharply, reaching for her, but she stepped away from him. "I will not have anyone hurt because of me," she said quietly. "Not again." Thomas's face twisted into a smile that made her skin crawl. "That is right, Jules. Come on down here and we will go home and forget all this foolishness." "I am not coming home," Juliana said, descending the porch steps. "I left you, Thomas. Our marriage is over." "Marriage is not over until I say it is," Thomas snarled. "You belong to me. You are my wife." "I was your punching bag," Juliana said, anger suddenly burning through her fear. "You beat me and you starved me and you left me to die. That does not make me your wife. That makes me your victim, and I am done being your victim." Thomas's face flushed dark red. "You ungrateful little witch," he spat. "I gave you everything. A home, a name, a place in the world, and this is how you repay me. By running off with the first cowboy who smiles at you. You gave me nothing but pain," Juliana said. "And Zachary is twice the man you will ever be. He has shown me what it means to be treated with kindness and respect. He has shown me what real strength looks like, and it is nothing like you." Thomas raised the gun, pointing it directly at her, and Juliana heard Zachary shout something behind her. But she kept her eyes on Thomas, refusing to look away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "You think he loves you," Thomas said viciously. "You think he will want you once he knows what you really are. A worthless, pathetic, broken thing, good for nothing but taking a beating. He will get tired of you just like I did. And when he does, where will you go then?" "Anywhere but back to you," Juliana said. "I would rather die than spend another day under your roof." "That can be arranged," Thomas said, and his finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Zachary moved, launching himself off the porch toward Juliana. Thomas fired, the sound deafening in the quiet evening. Juliana felt something burn across her shoulder, a line of fire, and then Zachary was tackling her to the ground, covering her body with his own. More shots rang out, and she heard men shouting, the sound of running footsteps. Then Zachary was hauling her upright, his face white with fear, his hands running over her body checking for injuries. "Are you hit?" he demanded. "Juliana, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "My shoulder," she gasped, and looked down to see blood soaking through her dress. "He shot me." "Inside now," Zachary said, half carrying her back to the house. Behind them, she could hear Henry and the other hands subduing Thomas and his friends, their voices angry and rough. In the kitchen, Zachary sat her down and carefully peeled back her dress to examine the wound. "It is just a graze," he said, relief flooding his voice. "It will hurt like hell, but it is not serious. You are going to be fine." "Thomas," Juliana said, her voice shaking, "what will happen to him?" "Henry is holding him for the sheriff," Zachary said, binding her shoulder with clean cloth. "He shot you, Juliana, in front of witnesses. That is attempted murder. He is going to jail." "He will get out eventually," Juliana said dully, "and when he does, he will come after me again." "No," Zachary said fiercely, taking her face in his hands. "He will not. Because we are going to make sure he stays behind bars for a very long time. And in the meantime, we are going to get you free of him, legally and permanently. I promise you, Juliana, this ends now." She wanted to believe him, but fear had its claws in her deep. Thomas had been a shadow over her life for so long that she could not imagine a future without that darkness. But Zachary was looking at her with such determination, such love, that she found herself nodding. "All right," she whispered. "We end this." The sheriff arrived an hour later and took Thomas and his men into custody. Thomas went quietly, which somehow made it worse than if he had fought. He looked at Juliana as they led him away, and the promise in his eyes was clear. This is not over. But maybe, Juliana thought as Zachary held her close through the night, her wounded shoulder throbbing but her heart strangely light. It was. Maybe shooting her in front of witnesses had been the mistake that would finally set her free. Maybe Thomas's rage had finally pushed him too far, and justice would actually be served. She fell asleep against Zachary's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time in years, she dreamed of spring. The trial took place in late May, and Wichita turned out in force to witness it. Juliana sat in the front row of the courtroom, Zachary on one side and Doc Brennan on the other, and told her story to the judge and jury. She told them about the beatings, about being left to freeze to death, about Thomas's constant cruelty. She showed them the scars on her body, the arm that had been broken and had healed slightly crooked. Doc Brennan testified about the extent of her injuries when Zachary had brought her to him. Henry Grant testified about the night Thomas had come to the ranch and shot her. The sheriff testified about the numerous complaints he had received about Thomas's drunken violence. Thomas's lawyer tried to paint Juliana as a disobedient wife who had provoked her husband's righteous discipline, but the jury was not buying it. They could see the truth written on Juliana's body, could hear it in her quiet testimony. And when Thomas took the stand and arrogantly defended his actions, claiming he had every right to discipline his wife as he saw fit, he sealed his own fate. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a verdict of guilty on charges of attempted murder and assault. The judge sentenced Thomas to 20 years in the territorial prison, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Juliana sat very still, unable to quite believe it was real. 20 years. Thomas would be an old man by the time he got out, and she would be free, truly, finally free. "It is over," Zachary said, squeezing her hand. "You are free, Juliana." She turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and saw her own joy reflected in his eyes. "I am free," she repeated wonderingly. "I am actually free." Outside the courthouse, people stopped to congratulate her, to tell her they were glad justice had been served. The women of Wichita, who had largely shunned her when she was Thomas's wife, now welcomed her with open arms. It was as though the trial had transformed her from a scandal into a symbol, proof that even in the rough justice of the frontier, a woman could fight back and win. But Juliana did not care about being a symbol. She only cared that Thomas was going away, that he could not hurt her anymore, that she could finally start building the life she wanted. "Marry me," Zachary said that night as they sat on the porch of the ranch, watching the stars come out. "You are free now, and I do not want to wait any longer." "Marry me, Juliana." "Yes," Juliana said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Doc Brennan officiated, and Henry stood up as Zachary's best man. The ranch hands and their wives attended, along with several people from town who had befriended Juliana during the trial. It was simple and heartfelt, nothing like the cold ceremony that had bound her to Thomas. and Juliana felt her heart would burst with happiness as she said her vows. "I promise to love you and respect you and stand by your side through all the days of my life," Zachary said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to be your partner and your friend, to listen when you speak and to value your opinions. I promise to build a life with you based on trust and honesty and love. This I swear before these witnesses and before God." "I promise to love you with all my heart," Juliana said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I promise to trust you and to believe in you, to stand with you through whatever comes. I promise to build a home with you, to fill our lives with joy and laughter, to be your wife in truth, not just in name. This I swear before these witnesses and before God." When the doc pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak, and the small crowd cheered. Juliana laughed against his mouth, happier than she had ever thought possible, and knew that this was what love was supposed to be. Not control and fear, but partnership and joy. Not a cage, but wings. The summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Juliana threw herself into her new life as Zachary's wife, discovering a passion for the ranch work that surprised them both. She learned to ride, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, and Zachary gave her Daisy, the gentle bay mare, as a wedding gift. She spent hours with the horses, learning their personalities, helping with their training and care. At night, she and Zachary would sit on the porch and talk about their dreams for the future. They wanted to expand the ranch, to build a legacy they could pass on to their children someday. They wanted to create something lasting and good, a place where hard work and honesty were valued, where people were treated with respect. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved," Juliana said one evening in August as they watched the sun set over the prairie. "I want them to never doubt that they are safe and valued and precious. I want to give them everything I did not have." "We will," Zachary promised, pulling her close. "We will give them the childhood we both deserved. And they will have you as a mother, which means they will be the luckiest children in Kansas." "And you as a father," Juliana countered, resting her head on his shoulder, "which means they will learn kindness and strength and what it means to be a good person." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Zachary said, "I have something to tell you. I have been putting it off because I was not sure how you would feel about it." Juliana sat up, concerned by the seriousness in his voice. "What is it?" "I got a letter from the prison," Zachary said carefully. "Thomas is dead. He got into a fight with another prisoner last week and was killed." Juliana went very still, trying to process what she was hearing. Thomas was dead. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had beaten her and tried to kill her, was gone. She waited for some feeling to emerge: grief, relief, guilt, but all she felt was a strange numbness. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, watching her closely. "I do not know," Juliana admitted. "I should feel something, should I not? But all I feel is empty. Is that terrible?" "No," Zachary said gently. "It is understandable. He hurt you deeply, Juliana. You do not owe him your grief." "I feel like I should mourn him," Juliana said slowly. "He was my husband once. But that person, the man I thought I was marrying, I do not think he ever really existed. He was always just Thomas, cruel and mean and broken, and I cannot mourn someone who only ever brought me pain." "Then do not," Zachary said simply. "Let him go. He has no power over you anymore, not even in death. You are free of him in every way now." And it was true, Juliana realized. With Thomas's death, the last shadow over her happiness had lifted. She was truly free, truly safe, truly able to move forward without fear. It felt like the final piece of her healing clicking into place. "I am glad he is gone," she said quietly. "Is that terrible?" "No," Zachary said, kissing her forehead. "It is honest, and you have always deserved honesty." That night, Juliana slept peacefully for the first time since the trial, untroubled by nightmares or worry. When she woke in the morning to find Zachary beside her, his face peaceful in sleep, she felt gratitude wash over her so strong it brought tears to her eyes. This man had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and she would spend the rest of her life showing him what that meant to her. Fall came to the prairie in a riot of gold and russet, the grass drying to wheat-colored waves that rippled in the constant Kansas wind. The horses grew their winter coats, and the ranch prepared for the cold months ahead. But this year, Juliana looked forward to winter instead of dreading it. This year, she would face the cold from inside a warm house, with a man who loved her by her side. In October, Juliana realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Zachary, wanting to give him the news with certainty. When she finally told him one evening at dinner, his face lit up with such pure joy that she started crying. "A baby," he said wonderingly, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Juliana asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Zachary said, resting his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. Juliana, this is the best news I have ever gotten in my life." "I am scared," Juliana admitted. "What if I do not know how to be a good mother? What if I am broken in ways I do not even realize yet and I pass that on to our child?" "You are not broken," Zachary said firmly. "You were hurt, but you healed. And you are going to be an amazing mother because you know what it is like to suffer, and you will make sure our children never have to experience that. You are going to love them fiercely and protect them and teach them to be strong and kind, just like you." "You really believe that?" Juliana asked, searching his face. "I know it," Zachary said, "just like I knew you were worth saving when I found you in that alley. Just like I knew I loved you the first time you smiled at me. I know you, Juliana Irons, and I know you are going to be a wonderful mother." Hearing her new name, Irons, instead of Foster, still gave Juliana a thrill. It was a symbol of her new life, her fresh start, and she wore it with pride. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Juliana bloomed with it, her body rounding and softening, her face glowing with health. Zachary was endlessly attentive, fussing over her in ways that made her laugh even as they touched her heart. He insisted she rest more, that she not do any heavy work, that she let him and the ranch hands handle everything. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Juliana would protest, but secretly she loved his concern. It was such a stark contrast to Thomas's indifference and cruelty that it still sometimes took her breath away. Winter settled in properly in December, bringing snow and bitter cold, but Juliana faced it without fear this time. The house was warm and well-stocked, Zachary was by her side, and inside her body, new life was growing. She spent the long winter evenings knitting tiny clothes and blankets, preparing the guest room, her old room, to become a nursery. On a snowy night in late February, almost exactly a year after Zachary had found her in the alley, Juliana went into labor. Zachary rode through the storm to fetch Doc Brennan, who arrived wind-blown and covered in snow but ready to work. Henry's wife, Sarah, came to help, and between them they guided Juliana through the long hours of labor. It was hard and painful and exhausting, and there were moments when Juliana thought she could not do it, when she wanted to give up. But then she would feel Zachary's hand in hers, would hear his voice encouraging her, and she would find the strength to keep going. Just after dawn, as the storm cleared and pale sunlight streamed through the window, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, red-faced and perfect, and when Doc Brennan placed him in Juliana's arms, she felt her heart expand to hold a love she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." Zachary sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, staring at their son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Juliana, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Juliana asked, unable to look away from her baby's face. "I was thinking," Zachary said slowly, "what about Joseph, after your mother? Her middle name was Josephine, was it not?" Juliana looked up at him, surprised and touched that he had remembered. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, Joseph is perfect." So Joseph Irons entered the world on a cold February morning, and his parents looked at him and saw not the past but the future. They saw hope and possibility and the promise that the cycle of pain could be broken, that love could triumph over cruelty, that spring always followed winter, no matter how dark and cold it seemed. The years that followed were good ones, full of the ordinary challenges and joys of ranch life. Joseph grew into a sturdy, happy child with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was curious and fearless, constantly getting into mischief, and both his parents adored him. When Joseph was 2, Juliana gave birth to twin daughters, Clara and Rose, who had their father's temperament and their mother's smile. The house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and laughter, and Juliana thrived in the midst of it. This was what she had been meant for. She realized not to be silent and small and afraid, but to be loud and present and joyful, to fill her home with love. Zachary expanded the ranch gradually over the years, buying more land, breeding better horses, building a reputation for quality and fairness that brought buyers from across Kansas and beyond. Juliana managed the household and the books, proving to have a head for business that complemented Zachary's skills with the horses. They became partners in every sense of the word, building their life together brick by brick. Some nights, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch as they had in the early days of their relationship and talk about how far they had come. Juliana would remember the broken woman Zachary had carried out of that alley, and she would marvel at the distance between that person and who she was now. Confident, capable, loved. A wife and mother, a partner in a thriving business, a woman who knew her own worth. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked Zachary one spring evening when Joseph was 5 and the twins were 3. "If you had not found me that night, if you had walked a different street—" "I try not to," Zachary admitted. "It hurts too much to think about." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Juliana. I cannot imagine my life without you and the children." "I was just thinking," Juliana said softly, "that you kept your promise. That night in Doc Brennan's office, you told me I would be all right. You promised me spring, even though it was the dead of winter and I was sure I was dying. And you were right. Spring came just like you said it would." "Spring always comes," Zachary said, pulling her close. "Even after the longest, darkest winter, spring always comes. You just have to survive long enough to see it." "I almost did not," Juliana said. "If you had not found me, but I did find you," Zachary interrupted gently. "And you did survive. And look at what we have built together, this life, these children, this happiness. None of it would exist if you had not been strong enough to hold on." "I held on because you gave me a reason to," Juliana said. "You showed me that there was something worth surviving for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the prairie, and Juliana thought about the long journey from that frozen alley to this peaceful evening. It had not been easy. There had been pain and fear and moments when she thought she would break under the weight of her past. But she had not broken. She had bent and flexed and ultimately grown stronger, like the prairie grass that survived harsh winters and came back greener every spring. When Joseph was 10 and the twins were 8, Juliana gave birth to one more child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, unplanned but welcomed with joy, and she completed their family in a way none of them had expected. Grace was gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for understanding people that reminded Juliana of her own mother. As the children grew, Juliana made sure they knew their story. Not the dark parts, not the details of Thomas's abuse, but the heart of it, that their mother had survived terrible things and had chosen to build a life based on love instead of fear. She wanted them to understand that strength was not about never falling down, but about getting back up. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. "You are the bravest person I know, Mama," Joseph told her once when he was 15, and beginning to understand the world in a more complex way. "The way you survived what happened to you, the way you built this life with Papa, it is amazing." "I had help," Juliana said, ruffling his hair even though he was already taller than her. "Your father saved my life in more ways than one. And every day, all of you give me a reason to be grateful I survived." "We are grateful too," Joseph said seriously, "that you survived, that you and Papa found each other, because otherwise we would not exist, and I think that would be a real shame." Juliana laughed and hugged him, this boy who would soon be a man, and felt her heart swell with pride and love. Her children were growing up strong and confident, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued. They would never know the fear she had known, would never question their worth the way she had. That was the greatest gift she could give them, and she gave it gladly. The years continued to pass in the way they do, sometimes slowly and sometimes in a rush. The children grew up and began lives of their own. Joseph took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to have inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's business acumen. The twins married brothers from a neighboring ranch and stayed close by, filling the house with grandchildren. Grace, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school for ranch children in a building Zachary built for her on their land. Zachary's hair went gray at the temples, and Juliana found laugh lines around her eyes that she wore with pride. They were growing old together, and every wrinkle and gray hair was a testament to a life well lived, to happiness earned and savored. On a spring evening in 1911, 30 years after Zachary had found Juliana in that alley, they sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sunset. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm breeze. Joseph was working with a young horse in the corral, his movements patient and sure. In the distance, the prairie stretched endlessly, golden in the fading light. "I have been thinking," Zachary said, his hand finding Juliana's as naturally as breathing, "about that promise I made you all those years ago." "Do you remember?" "Which one?" Juliana asked, smiling. "You have made me many promises over the years, and you have kept every one." "The first one," Zachary said, "when I lifted you out of that alley and told you that you would see spring again, that you would be all right." "I remember," Juliana said softly. "I did not believe you. I thought you were just being kind, telling me what I needed to hear." "I meant it," Zachary said. "Even then, when I barely knew you, I meant it. I looked at you and I knew that you were worth saving, that you deserved better than what had been done to you. And I promised myself that if you survived the night, I would do everything in my power to show you what your life could be." "You did more than show me," Juliana said, tears gathering in her eyes. "You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave me love and safety and children and a home. You gave me myself back, Zachary. The person I was supposed to be, before fear and pain twisted me into something small and broken. You gave me spring, just like you promised. We gave it to each other, Zachary corrected gently. I saved your life, maybe, but you saved mine too. You showed me what it meant to be truly brave, to face your fears and overcome them. You showed me what real strength looked like. And you gave me a love I never thought I would find, a family I treasure more than anything else in this world. Do you ever regret it? Juliana asked, voicing a question that sometimes still haunted her quiet moments. Taking me in, taking on my problems, tying your life to mine. You could have had an easier life without me. Easier, maybe, Zachary agreed, but not better, never better. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Juliana Irons. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would not change a single moment of it, even the hard parts, because they led us here. To this. He gestured at the scene before them, their home, their land, their family. The evidence of 3 decades of love and work and commitment. I used to think, Juliana said slowly, that I was lucky, that you saved me and I should be grateful and that was enough. But I understand now that it was not luck, it was choice. You chose to help me and I chose to survive, and together we chose to build something beautiful out of pain and darkness. That is not luck, that is love. That is love, Zachary agreed, and kissed her as the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. They sat there until the stars came out, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play, and Juliana thought about the scared, broken woman she had been 30 years ago. That woman would not have believed this future was possible. She would not have believed that pain could end, that love could be real, that spring could follow even the darkest winter. But it had. Spring had come just as Zachary had promised, and it had stayed. Not just one spring, but 30 of them, each one bringing new life and new hope. The prairie had taught her that life was cyclical, that winter always gave way to spring, that what seemed dead and frozen could burst into bloom when the time was right. She had been beaten and left in the cold, left for dead in an alley on the worst night of her life. But a cowboy had lifted her up and carried her home, had promised her spring when all she could see was winter. And he had kept that promise, day after day, year after year, until spring was not just a season but a permanent state of being. As the evening deepened into night, Juliana leaned against Zachary's shoulder and smiled, content in a way she once thought was impossible. Her life had not been easy, but it had been hers. She had survived, and more than survived, she had thrived. She had turned pain into purpose, fear into strength, winter into spring. And that, she thought as sleep began to claim her, was the greatest victory of all. Not just surviving, but building a life worth surviving for. Not just enduring, but flourishing. Not just making it through winter, but learning to dance in the spring rain. The grandchildren were called inside as darkness fell, their protests good-natured as Grace herded them toward the house for dinner. Joseph finished with the horse and headed to the barn, waving to his parents on the porch. The lights came on in the windows of the house, warm and welcoming, and smoke curled from the chimney into the star-filled sky. "Come inside," Juliana said to Zachary, standing and pulling him up with her. "Our family is waiting." "Our family," Zachary repeated, savoring the words. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am." "Not lucky," Juliana corrected, echoing her earlier words. "Blessed. Blessed by choices, by love, by each other." They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and laughter, and closed the door behind them on the night. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, and somewhere in its vastness, spring was preparing for its next arrival. But inside, spring had already come and decided to stay, blooming year-round in the hearts of a family built on love and courage, and the simple promise that no winter lasts forever. And they lived happily ever after, exactly as they deserved.